Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, during consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purpose of debate only, and I would like to yield the customary 30 minutes to my good friend from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to ask that all members who speak on the rule today would have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
I have a confession to make to you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I have 2 confessions to make. The first is I've got a big group up in the Rules Committee right now. It's my Gwinnett County Chamber of Commerce. It's an amazing county, tremendous diversity, tremendous record of success in solving problems. They've been up there visiting with leaders all day long, and I first met with them this morning while Mr. McGovern was down here on the floor during 5 minutes. I said, well, this is the 5-minute time. You can step right through the doors there if you'd like to see it. They said, well, who's on the floor? I said, well, it's this fellow right here. His name tag is there in the Rules Committee. I said, he's down there, hashtag end hunger. And I said, Jim and I can disagree on all sorts of issues, all sorts of public policy, but there is nobody in this institution who has a heart for service on the issue of hunger more than Jim McGovern does. I said, here he is. He's representing Massachusetts, of all places, and he's chosen to serve on the Agriculture Committee. If you're in Georgia and you serve on the Agriculture Committee, it's because you grow cotton and peanuts and row crop after row crop after row crop. When you're in Massachusetts and you sit on the Ag Committee, you want to end childhood hunger. You want to feed people. And I tell you that as a confession, Mr. Speaker, because I'm not going to confess to sharing my admiration for Jim McGovern all that often on the House floor. But I was with folks up there today who really do commit themselves to making a difference in our county. And it was nice to have a colleague on the floor, again, with whom I disagree about much, but who was putting everything he had, as he does every day, into an issue that he cares a lot about. That's all my constituents back home want, Mr. Speaker, is to believe that we have sincere, earnest folks working on sincere and difficult issues. So I thank my friend for that. My second confession, Mr. Speaker, is that ordinarily I really enjoy listening to the reading clerk read the rule. It gets me all wound up about how the process is. And of course, today she was talking about all the amendments we're going to make in order. We're making every single amendment offered by both sides of the aisle in order on this underlying bill. But I found myself thinking back to the days when I was a young man. I came up here with my class, and I was sitting up here in the gallery, and I walked into the floor at a time when the reading clerk was just standing up there reading. And there was no cheat sheet that they give you in the gallery, Mr. Speaker. You don't have any idea whether they're going to read for 20 seconds or 20 minutes. For all you know, they're going to read for the rest of the afternoon, and it was hard to follow. I get a cheat sheet here that my staff gives me before each rule. I didn't enjoy it as much today as I ordinarily do, Mr. Speaker, because there's a lot of procedural work in this rule. We're coming up on a bunch of big deadlines, and so there's the ability to bring up suspensions, these common sense bills that 2/3 of the House agree on. You can bring those up at any time. That provision is made in this rule. There's the ability to bring things up same day. If the Rules Committee goes up and passes a new rule, we can bring that bill to the floor immediately. Ordinarily, that would lay over for 24 hours, but because there's so many big things that we're trying to get done, we waive that. All of those procedural issues, Mr. Speaker, get in the way of my favorite part of the rule, which is that every single member of this body had a chance to come up to the Rules Committee, offer their ideas for how we can make this bill better, and the Rules Committee made every single one of them in order. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. This HRES 280, Mr. Speaker, is the structured rule for the consideration of H.R. 1694. And if you happen to tune into our Rules Committee web feed, Mr. Speaker, you can see it at rules.house.gov if you're not able to get up there with us as we meet sometimes late at night. It's for the consideration of H.R. 1694, the Frannie and Freddie Open Records Act of 2017. Now, folks know a lot about open records, Mr. Speaker. It is that procedure. It's called FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, where any member of the United States Community Board of Directors, that would be any United States citizen, can write and say, this is my government and I want some information about what's going on. That's been a very fundamental part of who we are as a people for as long as you and I have been alive. What is unusual, though, is the way the federal government has gotten involved in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. to the tune of about 187 billion with a B, Mr. Speaker, dollars, the American taxpayer bailed out these two private institutions, making the American taxpayer, making the U.S. government the largest shareholder in both of these institutions. And so we found ourselves in a unique situation of having the American taxpayers in charge of an institution with no ability, through the Freedom of Information Act, to request information from that entity. It just hadn't come up that often. Thank goodness we haven't had to bail out folks in that way in the past. Mr. Speaker, these entities that Frannie and Freddie were a part, we call them government-sponsored enterprises. They just haven't historically been the subject of that kind of taxpayer scrutiny. But times are changing. This bill, Mr. Speaker, went through the regular order process. Hearings held, markups held, came out of the Committee on Government Reform. And if you have not looked into government reform, Mr. Speaker, it's not often that government reform is moving unanimous legislation. Government reform is a tough committee to serve on. I served there in my first term here, Mr. Speaker. It is the hardest things about our government, how we hold each other accountable. And, of course, where you stand sometimes depends on where you sit here. If you sit on the left, you sit on the right, you might feel differently about government reform and accountability. This passed out of that committee on a voice vote, Mr. Speaker. The most collaborative of efforts moved this bill to the floor. Now, then when we got it in the Rules Committee, we had several members say, I think we can make this bill better. I think we can make this bill even better. Members who may not have had a chance to fix those issues on the Government Reform Committee. And again, as I said, we made all amendments in order from both sides of the aisle. I believe that totals 3 today, Mr. Speaker. But the take-home message for me is if you had an idea about how to fix this bill, the folks on the Rules Committee made that opportunity available to you. Mr. Speaker, we can't do the big things every single day of the week. Every piece of legislation we pass, unless we stuff everything into it, can't do everything for everyone. And candidly, I'm opposed to stuffing everything into a piece of legislation. I'm glad when we have an opportunity to move one issue, one subject, one topic at the time and deliver on behalf of the American people. This rule, Mr. Speaker, this structured rule, HRES 280, is a good bill. It's a good resolution that, if passed, will provide for the consideration of the underlying legislation, H.R. 1694, which, if passed, will provide the American taxpayer, for the first time, the accountability that they deserve for the $187 billion in taxpayer support that Frannie and Freddie have received. I'm proud to be associated with that, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves